Yeah, and so picture Athens like the center of all intellectual thought at the time, right? You got Socrates always asking those tough questions that we all know him for.
Yeah.
And then you have these traveling intellectuals like Hippias coming through all the time. They're debating all over the place in these public spaces.
Hmm.
And sophists, guys like Hippias, were basically professional teachers, right?
Yeah.
They'd offer instruction on all kinds of stuff from rhetoric to philosophy,
Hmm.
all for a fee, of course.
Right, right. The sophists were kind of controversial, though, right?
Oh, yeah. A lot of people back then would criticize them,
Yeah.
saying they cared more about winning arguments with clever speaking.
Oh, so like being persuasive.
Exactly, yeah. They weren't as concerned with actually finding the truth.
Mhm.
And that's a tension you'll see play out between Socrates and Hippias in this dialogue.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the big puzzle we're exploring with them today, the one that Socrates keeps pushing Hippias on, it seems simple at first. What is the beautiful? But it's amazing how this seemingly easy question actually leads to a pretty complex and honestly really entertaining clash between these two very different thinkers.
I love that.
Mm.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. Give us a little background on Hippias.
Yeah.
Who was he? What was he known for?
All right. So Hippias, picture this guy. Very flashy dresser, kind of showman, loved to make an entrance.
Okay.
And he had this really solid reputation as being wise. And his own city Eli's, they thought so highly of him that they kept sending him on all these important diplomatic missions.
Oh, wow.
So they really trusted him.
Okay, so the dialogue starts off with Socrates noticing that Hippias has been away from Athens for a while.
Right. And Hippias explains that the people of Eli's, they kept picking him for these ambassadorships to other cities. They trusted his judgment. They knew he'd bring back accurate information, about what was going on in those places.
Makes sense.
They preferred him over anyone else for this important job.
Got it. And Hippias was not shy about all the money he was making
Oh, no, not at all.
from teaching and all that.
He makes sure everyone knows how much he's been making from sharing his wisdom.
Okay.
He even compares himself to the ancient wise men. The guys like Thales, Solon, and Anaxagoras. They didn't charge for their knowledge at all, right?
Right.
And then he name drops some of the other big-time sophists of the day, like Protagoras, Gorgias, Prodicus, who, like him, were earning a ton of money.
He was making bank.
Oh, yeah, big time.
He even brags about raking in over 150 minas in Sicily,
Right.
and then another 20 from this smaller town called Inicum.
Yeah, and apparently this really impressed his father and all his friends back home.
Oh, I bet.
Hmm.
It's funny because then Socrates asks this wonderfully ironic question. He's like, so has the sophistic art become so much better that it makes those ancient thinkers look totally clueless by comparison?
Oh, that's a good one.
Right.
And what's really funny is Hippias totally agrees. He goes as far as to say that if someone like Maius or Daedalus tried to come back and compete with modern sophists or sculptors today, they'd be a laughingstock. People would think they were ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's this interesting little moment where Hippias explains why he's always praising the ancients. He admits that it's actually a strategy.
The strategy.
And so he can avoid envy from the living and resentment from the dead. Pretty pragmatic, don't you think?
That's wild. It's like he's playing the game,
Yeah.
Okay, so now we come to this really intriguing part where Socrates turns the conversation to Sparta.
Oh, yeah.
And, Sparta, they were known for being super disciplined and strong.
Strict. Very strict.
Very strict, yeah.
Yeah.
And they were all about developing virtue, right?
Exactly.
So Socrates asks Hippias, hey, you say you can teach virtue, and you're clearly not hurting for money, so why didn't you make a killing in Sparta?
Good point.
They were all about self-improvement. They had plenty of cash.
So what's the deal?
Okay.
Yeah, and Hippias' explanation is actually fascinating. He says the Spartans have this deep reverence for their ancient laws and their way of educating people. It's almost like a sacred thing to them. Introducing anything new is like sacrilege.
Oh.
But Socrates, always the one to challenge assumptions, he asks this simple but powerful question. Isn't it always the right thing to educate your sons in the best way possible if you have the means to do so?
Yeah.
And Hippias, he kind of agrees, that would be the right thing to do in principle.
Okay.
But then he quickly falls back on the Spartan law. He says, well, they have a law against any foreign education. But this really gets to Socrates. He's like, hold on, if your education is truly better, then maybe the Spartan law is messed up. Or maybe he says, maybe the Spartans are violating a higher principle by not hiring you.
Wow.
It really makes you think, right? Like, should tradition always come before progress? It's a big question.
Yeah. It really does. So then Socrates is like, all right, well, what kind of discussions do the Spartans enjoy?
Yeah, he wants to know what gets them going.
Yeah.
And Hippias reveals that they're not into things like astronomy or geometry or arithmetic or math or any of that.
None of the sciences?
Nope, not really.
Okay.
But they love talking about the family histories of heroes and famous men and like the migrations of different tribes or the founding of cities.
Oh, so like history?
Basically anything and everything related to ancient history.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then Socrates, he can't resist. He makes this funny little joke where he points out to Hippias that he's probably relieved that the Spartans don't care about like the list of Athenian archons since Solon.
Yeah.
You know, implying that even Hippias, with his supposedly incredible memory, would struggle to remember something so boring in detail.
Right.
Right, yeah.
And of course, Hippias just has to chime in again about how great his memory is.
Oh, yeah, he can't let that one go. No, Socrates, he goes for it. He makes this analogy. He's like, your vast knowledge of all these old stories is basically like the kind of tales that old women tell children.
Oh, wow. He's not holding back at all.
Right.
Kind of savage.
Like, yeah, it's entertaining,
Yeah.
but not exactly profound, you know, or useful for like deep understanding.
Okay, so Hippias tries to save face a little bit. He brings up this lecture he gave in Sparta on beauty and manners.
Right.
That was apparently a huge hit.
Oh, yeah, he was very proud of this one.
Okay.
He emphasizes how much they loved his choice of words in this lecture, which basically laid out a complete set of rules for how young men should behave, you know, if they want to be considered respectable.
Interesting. And he even gives us the premise for this lecture. It was like, imagine Neoptolemus asking the wise Nestor for advice after the Trojan War.
Right.
On how a young man should live to achieve glory and honor.
It's a good setup. And so Hippias, he presented this in Sparta, and he's planning to give it in Athens, too.
Wow. Okay. So with all that background, we finally get to the heart of the matter, the quest to define the beautiful.
Exactly. So Socrates asks Hippias point blank, what is the beautiful itself? Give me a short answer. And Hippias, without missing a beat, he says, a beautiful maiden.
Okay.
But Socrates immediately challenges this. He brings up examples of a beautiful mare and a beautiful lyre.
Interesting.
And he's like, aren't these things beautiful too? And
Right.
this right here, this highlights a really important point. Any true definition has to be universal. It has to apply to all instances of the concept, not just one specific example.
I like that. That's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, definitely.
So what does Hippias say to that?
So Hippias, he tries to refine his answer a little bit.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, fine. The maiden, she's beautiful on her own, but the mare and the lyre, they're only beautiful because of her. They have some quality of her beauty. But Socrates, he's ready with another objection.
Okay.
He's like, isn't a beautiful mare also beautiful in and of itself? Haven't we heard divine oracles praise the beauty of Spartan women and the horses from Thrace or Sicily?
Right. Okay. So he's trying to point out that there's beauty in all sorts of things.
Exactly.
Not just people.
Yeah, and it's not dependent on this idea of a beautiful maiden. But Hippias, he's getting a little impatient at this point.
Yeah, I can imagine.
He dismisses these comparisons as mean and contemptible.
Mean and contemptible.
Yeah, you can really feel him getting annoyed here.
Okay.
Like, he thinks Socrates' examples are beneath him, which actually tells us a lot about how he views beauty and social status.
Interesting. Okay. But Socrates isn't letting him off that easy.
Oh, no, not at all.
He pushes back.
He does.
What does he say?
So he's like, okay, imagine this mean, shabby fellow who only cares about what's true, regardless of what's considered polite or acceptable in society. And then he brings in this famous saying from Heraclitus, the most beautiful ape is ugly compared to the human race.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. And then he throws in this analogy, which is a little sarcastic, and he attributes it to Hippias.
Oh, really? What's the analogy?
He says, the most beautiful soup pan is ugly compared to a maiden. It's like he's poking fun at him a little. But he's also making a serious point about how you can't define beauty using just one limited example.
So Socrates is relentless. He just keeps coming at Hippias with these thought experiments. What's next?
Right. So he's like, all right, think about this. If we compare beautiful maidens to goddesses,
Yeah.
wouldn't the maidens suddenly seem not so beautiful?
That's a good point.
Right. And this leads to a pretty mind-bending question. Can something be both beautiful and not beautiful at the same time, depending on what you're comparing it to?
Oh.
It makes you realize how relative our perceptions of beauty are.
So true. Okay, so how does Hippias try to wiggle out of this one?
He throws out another definition. He says, fine, the beautiful is gold. Because gold, it adorns things right.
Yeah.
Makes them look more beautiful, more valuable. So in Hippias's mind, the value of gold and how visually appealing it is are like inherently linked to beauty.
Okay, interesting. But I bet Socrates has a counter-argument for that one, too.
He does, of course he does. He brings up this famous statue of Athena that was made by the sculptor Phidias. And he points out that Phidias didn't use gold for everything. He made her eyes, her face, her hands and feet out of ivory.
Okay, so he's basically saying that gold isn't always the best or most beautiful material.
Exactly. He's implying that some materials are more fitting for certain things. And Hippias, he tries to recover. He just throws out there that ivory is also beautiful.
Right, of course. But Socrates is like, well, if ivory is so beautiful, then why did Phidias use stone for the pupils of the eyes?
Yeah.
Why not ivory?
Yeah, he's got him there. And this brings up this whole idea of the becoming.
Becoming, okay.
Which is basically what appears beautiful or appropriate for a specific purpose or situation.
Oh, so like what's fitting or suitable?
Exactly.
Okay. And so Socrates gives a really practical example to explain this.
Too bad.
He compares different materials for making a soup spoon and a soup pan.
Oh, yeah, I remember this.
And he says, think about it. Sycamore wood, it might actually be more becoming or suitable for stirring and eating your soup than gold.
Right, because gold could mess up the pan or even make your food taste weird.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be very practical.
So what he's saying is that just because something's aesthetically pleasing doesn't necessarily mean it's the best choice for the job.
Exactly. There's a difference between something being beautiful to look at and something being functional or useful in a particular context.
Okay, I like that. So where does the conversation go from there?
So Hippias, he tries a new angle. He says, all right, maybe the beautiful is simply what is useful.
What is useful?
But Socrates is like, useful for doing what exactly?
Right.
If the beautiful is what's useful, does that mean it's powerful for good?
Okay.
But then what about all the things that are powerful for bad? Surely we wouldn't call those beautiful.
That's a good point. So how does Hippias respond?
He refines his definition again.
Okay, as they do.
He's like, all right, the beautiful is what is beneficial.
Beneficial. Okay.
So Socrates continues to probe this idea. He's like, okay, if what's beneficial is what produces good, then is the beauty essentially the cause of good? But if it's the cause, doesn't that make it different from the thing it causes?
Right. Okay.
So basically the beautiful would be separate from the good.
Wow, this is getting really complicated.
Yeah, like a philosophical puzzle.
It is.
You're going back and forth.
Yeah.
So Hippias, he makes one final attempt to pin down a definition.
Okay, what's his last shot?
He says, the beautiful is pleasure that we get through our senses of sight and hearing.
Sight and hearing, okay.
But Socrates, he's on it immediately. He's like, hold on, why are we excluding pleasures from the other senses, like taste and smell? If those also bring us pleasure, why aren't they beautiful too?
Yeah, good question.
Right. And he even points out how weird it would be to call, like, eating a delicious meal beautiful.
Oh, yeah. That would be strange.
Yeah, it just doesn't sound right.
It doesn't.
So Hippias, he tweaks his definition one last time.
Okay, this is it.
The beautiful is pleasure through sight and hearing, considered both separately and together.
Okay, so he's covered all the bases there.
Right. He thinks he's got it.
But Socrates is like, hold on. Does any pleasure differ from any other pleasure just by virtue of being a pleasure?
Yeah. And the answer, of course, is no.
Right, pleasure is pleasure.
Exactly. So Socrates is like, look, if that's the case, then there must be some other reason why we're picking sight and hearing as the sources of beauty. It can't just be because they're pleasurable.
Okay, so then what? What's Socrates' next move?
So he throws out this thought-provoking scenario. What if something pleases us through sight, but not through hearing, or vice versa? Can something be both beautiful because it pleases both senses together and not beautiful because it doesn't please one of them individually?
Wow, that's a good one.
It's tricky, right?
Yeah.
And this leads them to a really interesting discussion about how a characteristic can apply to a pair of things, but not to each individual thing. Or it can apply to each individual thing, but not to the pair as a whole.
Okay, so like how two people together make two, but each person is just one.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it.
But Hippias, at this point, he's had enough of this kind of thinking.
He's done.
Yeah, he's like, this is ridiculous. He calls it all nonsensical. And he makes this argument, look, if both of us are honest, then each of us must also be honest.
Yeah.
If both are healthy, each one is healthy, and so on.
Okay.
He applies this to all sorts of qualities, like being old or young, or having gold or silver statues of themselves, or being generous or wise or honorable.
So he's saying that Socrates is overthinking it.
Yeah, he's basically accusing Socrates and his followers of missing the forest for the trees. Like they're so focused on breaking things down into tiny pieces that they're losing sight of the big picture.
Interesting.
He's kind of referencing this philosopher named Anaxagoras,
Yeah.
who believed that everything contains elements of everything else.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Hippias is saying that Socrates is breaking things down too much, and that by doing so, they're missing the interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah. So instead of trying to like dissect the beautiful,
Right.
we should just appreciate it as a whole.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so how does Socrates respond to this? Because I feel like he's not just going to let Hippias shut him down like that.
He doesn't. He actually defends his method.
Yeah.
He argues that this breaking things down, this chopping, as he calls it, it's actually necessary to really grasp the true nature of things.
Interesting.
You need to analyze the parts to understand the whole.
Okay, I like that.
So they go back to the idea of pleasure through sight and hearing. And Socrates asks, can the cause of their beauty belong to both senses together, but not to each one separately?
Okay.
Or can it belong to each one separately, but not to both together?
Whoa. Okay, that is a brain twister.
Right.
So how does Hippias respond?
Well, by this point, he's completely confused.
I don't blame him.
He has no idea what Socrates is getting at. So Socrates, he tries to make things a little clearer with another analogy. This time he uses numbers. He's like, think about this. 2 odd numbers added together make an even number.
Yeah.
But each individual number is still odd.
Okay.
So what applies to a pair doesn't necessarily apply to each member of the pair.
Right.
And he's suggesting that beauty might work in a similar way with our senses of sight and hearing.
Okay. I'm starting to see where he's going with this.
Yeah.
But poor Hippias.
I know he's reached his limit.
He is so frustrated at this point. He's like, enough with these shreds and tatters of an argument.
Yeah, he's done with the philosophical nitpicking.
Yeah, he wants something concrete.
He does.
So what does he propose?
So he finally just comes out and says what he thinks is truly beautiful and valuable.
Okay.
The ability to give a really powerful, persuasive speech, in front of important councils or courts, that can lead to real success in the world.
Says like what?
Like staying safe and secure, acquiring wealth, and making powerful friends. And he basically tells Socrates to give up these pointless arguments.
Yeah, just drop it.
Yeah, and focus on achieving real results.
Okay.
Otherwise, he says, you're just going to look like a fool.
Oh, wow. Shots fired. Okay. So in his final remarks, Socrates admits that Hippias seems to have this practical wisdom,
He does.
about how to actually make it in the world.
Yeah, like how to get ahead.
Yeah. But then he gets really introspective. He talks about this inner voice that he has. Maybe it's like his conscience or an ideal of philosophical rigor.
Right.
Who keeps questioning him.
Yeah, like challenging him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This voice is like, how can you judge what's beautiful when you can't even define beauty itself?
It's like his own internal critic.
Right.
And Socrates admits to feeling kind of torn between these two perspectives. On the one hand, you have Hippias calling him a fool for getting lost in these abstract arguments.
Yeah.
And on the other, you have this inner voice pushing him to keep searching for a deeper understanding.
So even though they don't arrive at a clear definition of beauty, Socrates still sees the value in the conversation.
Exactly.
He feels like it's helped him grow.
Well, yeah, and it's a good reminder for us too, right? Like even if we don't get a neat and tidy answer, the process of asking these big questions can still be really valuable.
Absolutely. It's like that saying, the journey is the destination.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway here is that we should all be cultivating our own critical thinking skills.
Right.
Don't just accept easy answers, even if they're coming from someone you respect, like Hippias. There's so much value in questioning and exploring things for yourself.
So to wrap things up, here's a final thought for everyone listening. Think about Hippias' perspective. He believes that real success, achieving things in the real world, that's the ultimate beauty. How does that idea sit with you? How does it compare to these more abstract and philosophical definitions that Socrates was trying to figure out? What do you consider to be truly beautiful, and why?
Yeah, that's a question worth pondering. And we encourage you to explore your own understanding of beauty. How do these challenges from this ancient dialogue connect with your own experiences and your own beliefs?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those questions coming.
Yeah, keep thinking critically.
Absolutely.